Wisdom is more precious than rubies, and nothing you desire can compare with her. Proverbs 3:15. Have you ever been in a room where you said almost nothing yet somehow became the most unforgettable person there? Where your silence unsettled the loudest voices, and your presence shifted the entire energy without you having to explain yourself? If so, this message is for you. You're not just different, you're divinely equipped. You carry a kind of wisdom that doesn't shout, doesn't seek applause, and doesn't need validation. Because the wisdom you hold is sacred. It is royal. It is rare. God's chosen ones, you carry the wisdom of Solomon, not borrowed wisdom, not recycled insight, but something ancient, something divine, something encoded deep into your soul. And here's the mystery that few understand. That level of wisdom comes with a cost. It isolates you. It intimidates others. It sets you apart even before you fully realize what you've been entrusted with. People may think you're quiet, but inside you're solving problems 10 steps ahead. You notice everything: body language, energy shifts, the truth behind people's words, and you store it. You study it. You move like a master strategist playing chess while the world is still fumbling with checkers. Isn't it strange how your intelligence often becomes the very thing others try to silence or twist into something negative? That's because most people can't handle the kind of clarity that you live with daily. Your insight becomes their mirror, and they're terrified of what it reflects. But let's be clear, you are not too much. You are not too deep. You are not too wise for your own good. You are exactly what you're supposed to be. You were chosen to carry this level of insight because the world desperately needs it, even if it doesn't know how to honor it yet. Drop 777 in the comments if you've ever felt like your mind was 1,000 miles ahead while others were still stuck on page 1. If your intelligence made you the outsider, if you've ever held back your truth to make others feel more comfortable in their confusion. And to those of you who've supported this message through super thanks, I sincerely thank you. You're not just giving, you're building a sacred space where others like you can finally hear the truth about who they are. Your support is part of the divine blueprint, and I'm deeply grateful for it. You see, when Solomon asked God for wisdom, he didn't ask to impress people. He asked to lead with understanding. He asked to discern truth from lies, good from evil, sincerity from manipulation. And God was so pleased with that request, he not only gave Solomon what he asked for, he gave him everything else as well: honor, wealth, peace, and power. What if I told you the same promise is wrapped around your mind too? Have you ever wondered why people are drawn to you and yet seem uneasy in your presence? Why, even without saying much, others either admire you or envy you? Could it be because your intelligence holds the kind of discernment that cannot be controlled, bought, or manipulated? Stay right here, because we're about to unfold why your intelligence isn't just an advantage. It's a divine weapon, one that cuts through deception, dismantles manipulation, and sees through the fog of the world's distractions. We're going deep into what it truly means to be a modern-day Solomon, walking among people who don't even realize they're in the presence of a spiritual architect. This isn't just a message, it's a confirmation, a reminder that you were born with an invisible crown, that you've been reading between the lines your whole life while others are still sounding out the first word. And now it's time to stop downplaying that brilliance. It's time to sharpen it. Let's step into the revelation together. What you're about to hear next will explain why your life has always felt like a battle of the minds, and why, in the end, you always walk away wiser, stronger, and one move ahead. God's chosen ones, you carry Solomon's wisdom. Your intelligence leaves people speechless. They believed they could outsmart you, not realizing you weren't playing their game at all. You were the one who laid down the rules. Every move they made was within the boundaries you quietly defined. Isn't it something how the ones who scheme the most forget to check who authored the battlefield? They didn't lose to a person. They lost to the mind God Himself has refined, a mind shaped not by chance, but by calling. And now, every time your name crosses their memory, it's not just discomfort they feel, it's the sharp sting of having underestimated something sacred. They assumed your intelligence was mere coincidence. But how do you explain accuracy that repeats itself over and over? How do you label a person who never had to guess because they were simply remembering what was already encoded in their spirit? In the book of Proverbs, Solomon declares, "For the Lord gives wisdom, from His mouth come knowledge and understanding." Proverbs 2:6. That's what lives in you. You weren't learning randomly. You were awakening to what was already whispered over your life long ago. While they stumbled in noise, you moved in clarity. While they consulted the crowd, you consulted the Creator. Have you ever wondered why your silence rattles rooms louder than shouting? Why your pause feels like judgment to those hiding in falsehood? They misread your stillness for weakness, yet you were calculating like a king during war. Like Solomon standing before the two mothers fighting over one child, your wisdom pierces through deceit. You don't react, you discern. You don't argue, you reveal. Even now, some still whisper that you're too much, too sharp, too deep, too difficult to control. But what if too much is exactly what this world of delusion needs? What if you weren't designed to be digestible, but to be undeniable? Let's not forget what Jesus said in Matthew 10:16, "Behold, I send you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. Therefore, be wise as serpents and harmless as doves." That balance, fierce discernment wrapped in grace, is what you carry. Have you noticed how you often see the trap before it's even set? How every time they tried to bait you, you were already walking around it like you'd seen the blueprint? That's not guesswork, that's God work. You move differently because you're built differently. It's not pride, it's precision. The kind of precision David had when he stood before Goliath. Not with a sword, but with strategy. Others saw a boy. God saw a battle plan. Isn't it strange how those called by God always seem out of place until the moment of confrontation arrives? Your mind doesn't seek agreement, it seeks alignment. And alignment always agitates those living in disarray. They try to discredit you, not because you're wrong, but because you're always accurate before they're ready to admit the truth. You didn't just survive their plans, you exposed them. And now they wear their discomfort like armor, hoping to hide from the light you radiate. Why do people hate mirrors they didn't ask to look into? Why does truth offend those who've built comfort around lies? That's why your calling isn't to explain, it's to illuminate. Stop shrinking just to fit rooms too dark to receive you. Isaiah 61 says, "Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord rises upon you." That's not a suggestion, it's a command. Even figures in modern life like Cardinal Robert Sarah, a voice of profound moral clarity in the church, once said, "The world no longer listens to God because it no longer believes in silence." Doesn't that feel familiar? Your silence carries a divine volume. It unsettles because it speaks truth without needing words. The universe, or rather God, didn't just assign you intelligence. He embedded divine sight within your being. And now, your presence exposes shadows. You don't just walk into rooms, you shift the spiritual temperature. And here's the part most overlook. When heaven chooses someone, it also surrounds them. You weren't merely protected, you were backed by divine timing, concealed in divine wisdom, and lifted by divine favor. That's why none of their attacks landed. That's why the weapons formed against you failed. As it's written in Romans 8:31, "If God is for us, who can be against us? Not just words, but the invisible wall behind every one of your comebacks. So now, chosen one, what will you do with that awareness? Will you keep apologizing for what God wired into you? Will you keep explaining what was never meant to be explained but demonstrated? You weren't chosen to be understood. You were chosen to interrupt, to challenge, to reveal what can't remain hidden. And yes, they'll hate it, they'll gossip, they'll misunderstand. But remember this, they are playing a game of reactions while you are executing a design of revelation. And the truth is, they were never even qualified to play, because while they were guessing the rules, you were the one who wrote them. They thought they had you trapped. They schemed, they whispered, they moved their pawns, believing they were closing in. But the truth they never imagined was this: the maze they were navigating. You designed it. Every twist they thought they discovered was a turn you placed with purpose. Every door they thought they slammed behind you was a gate you unlocked long ago. They didn't lose because you were lucky. They lost because they walked into a war where you already commanded the terrain, owned the atmosphere, and mastered the quiet space between their every move. While they mistook your stillness for hesitation, you were listening to the rhythm of their downfall. What if the silence they mocked was not confusion, but calculation? What if the pause they celebrated was simply the inhale before divine precision struck? This wasn't emotion, it was orchestration. They wanted to provoke you, manipulate you, draw a reaction. But you didn't respond with rage or panic. You responded with stillness. And in that stillness, God was shifting the entire board. Psalm 46:10 reminds us, "Be still and know that I am God." Isn't that what you were really doing? Trusting the unseen while the proud mistook their motion for dominance. Your enemies thought they could outmaneuver you with noise and chaos, but your power isn't in reaction. Your power lives in the pause. That pause is where heaven speaks. That pause is where you let the battlefield reshape itself in your favor. Can you see now why the enemy fears your calm more than your confrontation? They never had control. Not even for a heartbeat, and the part that burned the most. You didn't even have to retaliate. You just watched, calculated, let their desperation expose their true nature. While they played games with mirrors, you held the blueprint in your bones. Because your wisdom didn't come from books, it came from alignment. Like Solomon, whose wisdom surpassed all the rulers of his time, 1 Kings 4:30, you carry an intelligence no one can imitate. It's not learned, it's remembered. You don't chase influence, you attract clarity. You don't perform, you reveal. Look at how they judged you using their own flawed rulers. Who speaks the loudest? Who moves the quickest? Who throws the first punch? But they didn't know they were up against a mind that whispers when others shout. A mind that shifts worlds in silence. Let's consider a real-life example. Chess grandmaster Garry Kasparov once said, "Attackers may sometimes regret bad moves, but it is much worse to forever regret an opportunity you allowed to pass you by." You, chosen one, didn't waste your moves. You let them believe the illusion of victory, because you knew that collapse always comes to the ones who build on ego instead of understanding. They called your retreat weakness. But what if your silence was just the universe preparing your next elevation? What if the losses they mocked were simply redirections from God? Romans 8:28 says, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him." Every betrayal was your syllabus, every setback a classroom, every enemy a teacher wearing their own destruction. Now let's talk about those so-called friends, the ones who smiled while secretly calculating your fall, the ones who studied your kindness like a blueprint for manipulation. They thought they understood you, but to understand you requires depth, and they were too shallow to even touch the surface. Isn't it ironic how people underestimate what they're incapable of perceiving? You're not simple. You are layered, encoded, unpredictable. You are divine strategy wrapped in human form. You are Solomon's fire relit in this generation. They couldn't read you because you weren't written in their language. You let them think they had a chance. That's the sting they can't forget. You gave them space, not out of weakness, but because you were rising, not escaping. Because when you are chosen, even your stillness becomes warfare. Even your breath carries consequence. They couldn't defeat you because they didn't understand you. And now, every time they see you rise through the storm they created, they are forced to reckon with the system they mocked. A divine system, a holy alignment, a force that doesn't play fair because it doesn't play at all. Have you ever felt the shift before it happened? That strange knowing in your gut, that internal alarm that sounds even when nothing has been said. You're not paranoid, you're tuned. That's the whisper of the Spirit. That's discernment. Hebrews 5:14 describes mature believers as those who, by constant use, have trained themselves to distinguish good from evil. That's what lives inside you. They can't lie effectively in front of someone who hears between the lines, and that's what terrifies them. You don't respond to manipulation. You dissolve it just by seeing clearly. And now, look at them, scrambling, confused, watching you ascend quietly through the ashes of their betrayal. This is what happens when people play games with the chosen. They weren't just testing you. They were testing the eternal order. And the order does not fail. Let them misjudge your silence. Let them mistake your distance for defeat. They thought you weren't clapping back because you had nothing to say. But wisdom doesn't waste energy explaining itself to noise. Kings don't throw punches at jesters. And revelation doesn't perform for audiences that mock what they can't grasp. What they never expected was that the fire would sharpen you, that betrayal would stabilize you, that heartbreak would make you unbreakable. Because when you are chosen, pain isn't just suffering, it's programming. And to every chosen one watching this who has ever been made to feel too much, too aware, too deep, you're not broken, you are built differently. And they know it. That's why they work so hard to keep you doubting. Because once you embrace the full clarity of who you are, the game ends. Their illusion dies, and the weight of truth crashes everything false they built. So don't apologize for what you know. Don't dilute your wisdom to be digestible. Don't downplay what God wrote in your soul just to ease their discomfort. You were not made to be understood. You were made to be undeniable. And when people try to test that truth, let them. Give them your silence. Give them room to collapse under the weight of their own deception, because you weren't called to play the game. You were chosen to outlive it. And anyone who gambles against divine intelligence is always playing a losing hand. They mocked your clarity. They laughed at your warnings. They dismissed your insight as paranoia. And yet, everything you said, everything they ignored, played out exactly as you described. What they now call coincidence, you know, was code. Not luck, not chance. It was pattern. And you were reading it long before anyone else noticed the pieces shifting. You saw the collapse forming in silence. You sensed the betrayal before it wore a face. Because while others stumble through life, hoping things just work out, you are not hoping, you are decoding. You see the framework behind every outcome. You don't just notice patterns, you interpret them. Like Joseph, the dream interpreter in Genesis, who could see meaning in what others dismissed as dreams. Your intelligence operates on a different dimension. Genesis 41:39 says, "Since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you." That same divine wiring lives in you. It's not fantasy, it's foresight. Do you ever wonder why your intuition is so exact it frightens even you? Why you can feel the energy shift in a room before anyone speaks? Why someone's tone, even if wrapped in kind words, instantly rings alarm bells in your spirit? That's not overthinking. That's oversight. That's divine pattern recognition at work. They live in fog, but you're guided by foresight. You hear what isn't spoken, you sense what isn't shown, you know what isn't proven yet. And every time reality catches up to your knowing, they act surprised, as if they hadn't tried to gaslight you into silence just weeks before. They told you that you were too sensitive, that you were imagining things, that you were reading too much into it. And sometimes you started to believe them. You questioned your own clarity. You silenced your warnings. You muted the inner voice that has never failed you, just to be accepted by people who can't even comprehend your gift. Why do they do this? Why mock the very insight that could have saved them? Because deep down, they know you're tuned into something they'll never access. And pride hates to bow before truth it didn't discover first. This happens to those who are spiritually aligned. 1 Corinthians 2:14 says, "The person without the Spirit does not accept the things that come from the Spirit of God, but considers them foolishness, and cannot understand them because they are discerned only through the Spirit." That's what's happening. You are discerning spiritually coded truth, and they are stuck in distortion, mistaking light for confusion. You see, people don't fear your eyes. They fear your mind. Because your intelligence isn't a product of academic memorization. It's perception layered with spiritual accuracy. While they analyze words, you track silence. While they chase trends, you already see where those trends end. This kind of sight has always threatened the world. Jesus himself said in Matthew 13:13, "Though seeing, they do not see. Though hearing, they do not hear or understand." You have been given eyes to see through, not just look at. That's why your presence feels invasive to people still trying to hide behind appearances. Let's take a look at a real-life example. Brené Brown, a research professor and speaker known for her work on vulnerability and truth, once said, "The truth is uncomfortable, but it's never dangerous. What's dangerous is the avoidance of it." That's what your clarity represents to others. Uncomfortable truth. And many would rather label you too much than confront what your insight forces them to see in themselves. They say, "It's just a coincidence." But how many coincidences does it take before they admit it's not coincidence? It's pattern. And how many patterns must you accurately read before you finally stop second-guessing yourself? You don't just listen. You perceive. You don't just observe. You see. And when they try to shame you into silence, it's not because they think you're wrong. It's because they fear you might be right again. And they can't handle what that would expose. Let them talk. Let them mock what they don't understand. But don't you dare apologize for that lightning flash of knowing that strikes through your gut like prophecy. You weren't built for their comfort. You were chosen for clarity. That deep knowing in you, the one that tingles your spine when something's off, even though everything looks fine. That's not suspicion. That's spiritual calibration. You are aligned with truth. And the truth is never welcome in spaces built on performance. They'll walk into traps you warned them about. They'll embrace people you already stopped trusting. And when it all falls apart, they'll pretend they always believed you. But you'll know, because you always do. What terrifies them isn't what you've said. It's what you haven't said yet. It's the fear that if you already saw this much, what more do you know that you haven't revealed? What else are you silently carrying while the world is still catching up to your last vision? And you, chosen one, you don't need to convince anyone. You don't need to prove anything. You're not chasing credit, you're chasing codes. While they try to win the argument, you're already reading the next system. The battle they think they're fighting, you finished it before they even started. Don't betray your gift just to be accepted. Don't mute your clarity just because others are threatened by its sharpness. Remember this, you're not crazy, you're clear, you're not paranoid, you're prophetic. They call it coincidence. But you, God's chosen, no better. You've been reading the map while they stumble over the terrain, and when the dust settles, you'll already be on to decoding the next reality. Because you weren't chosen to fit in, you were chosen to see. They assumed your silence was emptiness, unaware that it was intelligence taking aim. While others rushed to be heard, you waited to be precise. You weren't quiet because you had nothing to say. You were quiet because you were loading something they'd never see coming. You didn't raise your voice to prove your power. You raised your silence, and in doing so, erased their illusion of control. Doesn't Scripture teach us that silence often carries more power than speech? In Ecclesiastes 3:7, Solomon writes, "A time to keep silence and a time to speak. You know the difference. And when your moment to speak arrives, your words don't just enter the room, they dismantle it, because your stillness isn't passive. It's the coil before a strike, the calm before the truth drops like thunder. While they ramble to dominate the space, you remain still, not because you're retreating, but because you're collecting data. You observe their patterns, listen as the lies stack one on top of another until the weight of their false narrative collapses under its own arrogance. They didn't realize they were performing for someone who already knew how the act ends. You're not reacting because you don't need to. You're not impressed, not confused, not swayed. That's the kind of focus Jesus demonstrated when he stood silently before Pontius Pilate, who marveled that the Son of God answered him nothing. Matthew 27:14. That same silence, that unshaken composure, it unnerves those who thrive on noise. Why do you think they keep trying to get a reaction from you? Your silence isn't hesitation, it's compression, it's judgment wrapped in poise, it's insight clothed in restraint. They shout and you blink, they provoke and you remain unmoved. And deep down, that's what shakes them. Because in a world trained to equate volume with victory, your refusal to speak becomes its own form of power, one they can't manipulate. Renowned Holocaust survivor and psychologist Viktor Frankl once said, "Between stimulus and response there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response." You live in that space, and in that space you build empires while others burn bridges. Have you noticed how often people overexpose themselves, revealing their every move, while you quietly absorb their entire playbook? That's not detachment, it's divine discernment. While they are scripting performances, you are documenting the truth. Your mind doesn't race to speak, it races to understand. You're a vault, and what terrifies people most is not knowing what's behind your sealed expression. That's why there's never neutrality with you. People either stand in reverence of your depth or tremble before your unreadable gaze. There is no middle ground when the atmosphere shifts every time you walk in without saying a word. They don't know what you know. Worse, they don't know if you've already used what you know to move them like chess pieces. That's why your silence doesn't calm them, it convicts them. They thought your stillness meant surrender. They mistook your composure for submission, but your lack of reaction wasn't agreement, it was assessment. You were documenting their downfall before they even realized there would be one. And by the time they tried to regroup, you were already beyond reach. Proverbs 17:28 says, "Even a fool who keeps silent is considered wise." Now imagine the silence of someone God has actually anointed with wisdom. How dangerous must that be? That's you. A vessel of strategic silence, a weapon of invisible war. You don't fire words carelessly. You aim, and when you release, it ends things. Not with drama, but with finality. You don't clap back because you don't need to. You let the collapse of falsehood be your answer. That's how chosen ones fight. Through timing, through truth, through stillness that speaks louder than the loudest voice. So, why do they try so hard to draw you out? Because your calm reflects the chaos they haven't yet acknowledged. Your restraint reveals their lack of discipline. Your peace is a mirror they didn't ask to look into, and they hate you for it. Not because you harmed them, but because you exposed what they never wanted to face. The world has trained people to fear silence, to panic in stillness, to believe that words equal power. But you've learned what only the wise ever discover. Silence is not absence. It's alignment. It's the breath before the breakthrough. Take, for example, Pope Benedict XVI, a man known for deep reflection and measured speech. He once said, "Silence is not merely an absence of sound. Silence is the presence of something greater. You carry that presence. And it's not just greater, it's holy. You don't need applause to validate what's already been ordained. You don't need to defend what heaven has already justified. The very energy shifts when you speak, not because you perform, but because you strike. And when you strike, illusions die. They feel it every time you walk into a room and say nothing but command the atmosphere, every time you listen more than you speak, and yet they know they've been disarmed. Every time your silence says what their longest speech never could. You were never idle. You were intentional. Let them talk. Let them spin. Let them shout into the void, hoping their noise will become substance. You stay grounded. Stay still. Keep watching, because the longest listeners carry the sharpest swords. And when you move it, maybe, iti tanto, it won't be a debate. It will be the burial of everything false they tried to build around you. They thought you were just another participant in the system, a silent piece in a predictable puzzle. But what they never saw coming was this. You weren't just playing their game. You were redesigning the entire board beneath their feet. While they clung to instructions passed down through tradition and fear, you were quietly rewriting the very language of success. While they memorized rules designed to limit the imagination, you questioned why such rules ever existed. Have you ever noticed how people panic when someone stops asking for permission? That's what shakes them most. You didn't wait for a seat at their table. You built a new table in a room they didn't even know existed. They were taught there was only one formula, only one ladder, one structure. But then you arrived not to challenge them, but to reveal that the ladder was leaning against the wrong wall all along. They followed steps. You created space. They looked for open doors. You walked straight through the wall they said couldn't be crossed, not with arrogance, but with divine alignment, not by defying systems, but by seeing through them. That's what chosen ones carry, a wisdom that transcends explanation. It isn't learned, it's embedded. In James 1:5, the scripture reminds us, "If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, and it will be given." You, however, didn't just ask. God gave you a portion that shocks the room. You don't move with hesitation, you move with vision. While others seek approval, you follow revelation. You don't need their blueprint when you're holding divine architecture. How could they ever understand that you're not just breaking the mold? You're revealing that the mold itself was always too small. Visionaries throughout history have faced the same resistance. Steve Jobs, the creative mind behind Apple, once said, "The people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do." That quote was about people like you. The difference is, your source of innovation isn't ego, it's divine download. You're not rebelling for the sake of rebellion. You're simply moving according to a kingdom design they cannot decode. What unsettles them most is this. You win without following the steps. You succeed without their checklist. You open paths they were taught don't exist. That's why they accuse you of cheating the system, not because you broke the rules, but because you rendered their limitations obsolete. They hate it not because you're wrong, but because you proved their version of reality was too small to hold truth. And here's what many won't admit. Their dependence on the system makes them feel safe, but your independence exposes the system's weakness. They're terrified not of what you've done, but of what your existence reveals. That the structure wasn't sacred, it was just safe. That their obedience to it wasn't wisdom, it was fear. You don't color inside the lines because you know the lines were drawn by those too afraid to expand. While they chase after approval through titles and systems, you chase after impact through clarity and freedom. They ask, "Why don't you follow like we do?" And deep down, they already know the answer. It's because you weren't made to follow. You were called to reconstruct. And yes, there were seasons you doubted yourself. You wondered if maybe the crowd was right. Maybe blending in would be easier. Maybe the silence in your soul meant you were lost. But every time the Spirit reminded you, you were never meant to fit inside what was built for containment. You were born to create what liberates. Like Noah building an ark when there was no rain in sight, you were called to obey something no one else could see. Can you imagine the confusion of the people watching him? And yet, it was Noah's obedience to unseen wisdom that preserved the future. Genesis 6:22. That's what you carry. Vision before validation, revelation before results. You've always made people uncomfortable, not because you're cruel, but because your existence breaks their illusions. And when they tried to challenge you with logic rooted in fear, you answered with silence backed by truth. You didn't climb their ladder, you built your own. And worse, at least to them, you climbed it sideways, as if gravity itself answered to you. They ask how you did it. They wonder what your secret is. But there is no secret. The truth is, you stopped thinking like them. You stopped chasing their goals. You stopped seeking safety and instead followed spirit. That's your edge. That's your threat. And now they want to tame you, label you, explain you, because anything they can't control, they feel compelled to reduce. But you weren't sent here to be reduced. You were sent to rebuild. Isaiah 43:19 says, "See, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? You are that new thing." A walking disruption to outdated patterns. A living blueprint of what happens when someone trusts the voice of God more than the voices of men. So don't shrink. Don't apologize. Don't trade your divine download for their stale doctrine. You weren't made to follow the map. You were made to redraw the terrain. Let them cling to their frameworks. Let them whisper their doubts. Let them watch in confusion. Because what terrifies them most is this. They were told there was only one way, until you arrived and rewrote the future. And you didn't just succeed, you made it look inevitable. You don't just walk into a room, you transform it. While others enter seeking a place, you arrive carrying presence. The moment you cross the threshold, the frequency shifts, and even when they pretend not to notice, their bodies betray them. The air thickens, conversations stutter, eye contact flickers. People adjust their voices, their posture, their narratives, because something inside them recognizes what their minds haven't yet named. It's not fear of you, it's the fear of being seen by you. Because your silence doesn't signal absence, it signals command. You're not asking for space, you redefine how space works. You don't try to dominate, you simply exist, and everything else bends. Why does that happen? Because your presence demands alignment, not attention. You're not performing. You are the frequency to which everything else must tune. This is the weight of divine awareness. It's what Moses carried when his face shone after encountering God on Mount Sinai, Exodus 34:29. The people could not look directly at him because the residue of God's glory disrupted their comfort. Likewise, you carry the afterglow of encounter, an unseen force that exposes what's hidden, challenges what's artificial, and brings truth into the atmosphere without you uttering a word. Some people light up a room, but you, chosen one, you reprogram it. You don't move according to their rhythm. Your energy is tuned to something higher, sharper, deeper. It's like you're receiving signals from a frequency the world forgot existed. And when you show up, Those who are not tuned to that signal feel scrambled. Some are drawn to you with awe, others recoil in discomfort, but no one remains untouched. Your presence presses on them like gravity they didn't expect, like spiritual weather they can't explain. Why does this happen without your intention? Because you carry revelation, not performance. While they imitate confidence, you embody clarity. You don't need noise to establish weight. You don't need a title to walk in authority. As Jesus demonstrated repeatedly, true power doesn't yell. It stands still and speaks only when necessary. When he rebuked the storm with 3 words, "Peace, be still," even the wind and waves submitted. Mark 4:39. That's the kind of weight your silence carries. You're not arrogant, you're aware. And that awareness exposes those who are hiding behind masks. They feel it before they process it. That uncomfortable tightness in their chest when you're around. It's not you. It's their falsehood unraveling under the clarity of your presence. That's why some people shrink around you, not because you did anything wrong, but because your authenticity confronts their performance. You don't search for deception, you simply notice it. You can feel the shift in energy before the lie is even spoken. You hear the dishonesty in the tone, sense the agenda in the silence, and that makes you unreadable, unshakable. They've never encountered someone who sees this clearly and still stays this calm. That's what chosen ones carry. Not loud power, but real power. The kind that doesn't seek recognition because it already walks in purpose. And in a world addicted to showmanship, your stillness becomes confrontation. Why do people get defensive in your presence, even when you're kind? Why do some talk nervously or over-explain themselves to you without being asked? Because your energy is a mirror, and while they may not understand it consciously, their spirit does. They feel the weight of truth surrounding you, and truth unfiltered is always hard to stand next to when you're built on illusion. Even leaders feel it. Those who posture and pretend will avoid locking eyes with you because you see them, not the image, not the mask, but the core. That's what you do. You don't shift rooms by being loud. You shift them by being real. And yet, there were times you doubted yourself. Times you asked why people grew distant, why friends seemed uncomfortable, why conversations turned awkward when you did nothing but exist. Hear this clearly. They weren't rejecting you. They were rejecting the pressure of being seen without filters. You didn't push them away. They quietly stepped back when the mirror got too honest. Jesus experienced this same resistance. In John 3:19, he said, "Light has come into the world, and people loved the darkness rather than the light, because their works were evil." This is your story too. You carry light, and not everyone is ready to be seen in it. So don't shrink. Don't apologize for being the presence that disturbs what's fake. You weren't sent to fit in. You were sent to shift atmospheres. You weren't called to keep the room comfortable. You were called to make it confront itself. Like the late Queen Elizabeth II, whose presence alone commanded attention without needing flamboyance, your power lies not in volume, but in vibration. The kind of authority that shifts the room before your name is spoken. That's the divine design in you. Crowds may follow noise, but real leaders recognize presence. And your presence doesn't beg. It awakens, it stirs, it sharpens, and those with ears to hear will lean in, while those stuck in illusions will flee. You weren't given this frequency to whisper. You were entrusted with it to ignite reformation in the atmosphere. You are not simply passing through spaces. You are recalibrating them. Wherever you go, truth enters with you, and lies start to tremble. Let them stare. Let them question. Let them pretend they don't feel it. Deep down, they know. This isn't ordinary. This isn't ego. This is encounter. You weren't made to dim your light. You were made to reveal theirs. And if they can't handle your shine, they're not ready for their own reflection. They wore a mask, but you weren't fooled. While others were captivated by their polished surface, you saw straight through to the schematics beneath, the wiring of their soul, the motives beneath the smile. They thought they were putting on a show. What they didn't realize is that you weren't watching the actor. You were reading the script. You weren't studying their face. You were tuned into the frequency of their spirit. A deceiver fears many things, but none more than standing in front of someone who doesn't require proof to perceive. Someone who doesn't need receipts or recordings, just silence and presence. That's what you carry. The power to unravel performance without confrontation. Can you sense how often your discernment unsettled the most practiced manipulators? They wrapped their words in honey and charm, rehearsed kindness down to the blink, thinking you'd join the chorus of applause like everyone else. But instead of clapping, you listened for what wasn't said. Isn't it fascinating how even before they spoke, you sensed it? That slight delay in their response, the forced inflection, the energy of their presence split apart from their presentation. Others saw friendliness, you saw fragmentation. Others heard flattery, you felt friction, and you didn't need them to slip up to catch them. You just needed to be in the room. It wasn't suspicion, it was spiritual technology. You've been equipped to read beneath the surface. God didn't give you this gift to be polite. He gave it to protect and position you. In Hebrews 4:12, Scripture says, "For the word of God is alive and active. It judges the thoughts and attitudes of the heart." That's the level of insight you carry, not just into people's words, but into the heart behind them. They didn't realize your intelligence wasn't logical. It was prophetic. Even someone like Brené Brown, a renowned research professor and storyteller, once said, "People can only meet you as deeply as they've met themselves." And that explains it, doesn't it? They hadn't met themselves in truth, so they couldn't meet you at all. Your very presence was a mirror they didn't want to look into. That's why they feared you, not because you accused them, but because you didn't react. You just observed. You didn't attack their lies, but you didn't participate in them either. And that quiet refusal, that unnerved them more than confrontation ever could. You didn't laugh when everyone else did. You didn't echo their charm. You didn't reward the performance. You didn't expose them with drama, but they walked away feeling seen. And for someone who survives in shadows, being seen is a form of spiritual arrest. They didn't just fear being found out. They feared being known. They feared you would notice the parts of themselves they've buried for years. The pain behind the persona. The fear wrapped in pride. The contradiction between their words and their walk. And you did notice. Not because you were trying to, but because you were wired to detect what others are trained to ignore. And when you tried to express it, when you tried to gently bring it to light, they flipped it on you, told you that you were paranoid, accused you of being too sensitive, too suspicious, too intense. And for a moment you questioned yourself. Have you ever stopped to wonder how many times you've gaslighted your own instincts to keep the peace? How often you've dulled your discernment to avoid disrupting the comfort of those hiding behind performance? But deep down, you never forgot what your spirit already knew. You don't guess, you discern. You don't imagine, you intercept. What you feel isn't fantasy. It's God's alert system vibrating through your bones. In the book of Acts, the Apostle Peter encountered Ananias and Sapphira, a couple who lied about their offering to the church. Without anyone telling him, Peter perceived their deception through the Holy Spirit and confronted them on the spot. Acts 5:1-10. He didn't need evidence, he carried truth. You are built in that same spiritual lineage, wired for revelation. And this is why manipulators either avoid you or try to redefine you. If they can't deceive you, they'll try to discredit you. Too intense, too deep, too suspicious. But what they're really saying is, too aware to fool. That awareness is your armor. Your clarity is your inheritance. And yes, sometimes it makes you the outcast, but chosen ones are never called to fit in. They are called to reveal what others deny. You don't need the receipts. You are the receipt. You don't need the story. You feel the fracture beneath the headline. You were never sent to be a detective. You were born to be a revealer. You are a presence that brings pressure. You carry truth in your stillness. That's why the mask couldn't survive around you. And now, what they feared has already happened. You didn't destroy them. You let them destroy themselves. You didn't argue. You held the line. And they felt it every time they looked into your eyes and saw their reflection distorted by the truth they've been running from. Stop doubting what you know. Stop apologizing for the clarity God gave you. Stop hiding the gift that guards your destiny. In 1 John 2:27, it is written, "The anointing you received from him remains in you, and you do not need anyone to teach you. But his anointing teaches you about all things." That inner voice, that unsettling clarity, that's your anointing in action. So when they try to smile over secrets and mask their motives in flattery, you don't have to react. You've already read the blueprint. You've already seen the glitch in their performance. And the most dangerous thing in the room is the one who needs no proof. You don't need to say a word, because you are the evidence they prayed no one would ever become. They scrambled for the throne, unaware that you are the bloodline. They clawed for crowns, fought over crumbs, and contorted themselves for titles, never realizing that the very thing they were desperate to become is what you already are. While they scheme, compete, and exhaust their souls chasing power, you walk with the quiet weight of inherited authority. You didn't chase the throne. You were born from the lineage of kings. And something in you remembers that. Do they? What they don't understand is that power doesn't come from noise. It comes from origin. You were never built to prove. You were built to embody. While others shout to be heard, you whisper, and the whole room adjusts. They attempt to manipulate environments, but you simply enter and atmospheres recalibrate. You don't ask for respect. Your presence demands it without a word. King David was anointed while still tending sheep. He wasn't crowned through competition. He was chosen in silence. When the prophet Samuel poured oil over him in 1 Samuel 16, David didn't campaign for favor. God pointed him out. Have you ever wondered why your presence unsettles people even when you're silent? Why your calmness causes others to stumble over their words? That's because your energy isn't built on fear. It's built on certainty, a stillness that comes from alignment, a quiet strength that makes insecure leaders feel small and false rulers feel exposed. You don't intimidate. Your clarity simply reminds people of what they lack. And when they feel that gap, some admire you, but others fear you. Because you didn't climb ladders or beg for validation. You never had to. You didn't learn how to lead. You came into this world with a compass already set. And while they market their image like a product, your authenticity makes their performances fade. Do you notice how often they try to draw you into their games, as if they need to prove that you're playing too? But you're not. You're the disruption to the entire system. You're not even trying to win their race. You're redesigning the track they thought was fixed. It's not arrogance, it's identity. And that's why they can't stand you. Because you're not hungry for what they worship. They chase status, applause, titles. But you carry presence, peace, and power. And the irony is, while they believe power must be seized, you were born radiating it. That difference makes them question their entire path. In Matthew 23:11 through 12, Jesus said, "The greatest among you will be your servant. For those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted." They misunderstand this. They think shouting equals strength, but the highest level of leadership is humble stability, and you live that without effort. Consider Pope Francis, leader of the Catholic Church, who has quietly redefined global leadership, not through dominance, but through compassion and presence. He once said, "True power is service." That's the very principle you carry. You don't need to be seen. You carry light that makes others reflect. You don't create waves to prove impact. Your very stillness is a tidal force of clarity. That's why people either draw near or pull away from you. Some crave the stability you radiate. Others challenge you out of insecurity. But nobody leaves unchanged. Why do you think they grow so defensive, even when you say nothing at all? Why do they act as though your quiet observation is confrontation? It's because they've built their identity on noise, struggle, and striving. And then you walk in, unchanged, unbothered, and unmistakably complete. That makes them question everything they've built. You weren't trying to compete, but your very existence confronts every false foundation they stand on. Let this truth settle deep. The reason you felt misunderstood isn't because you're too much. It's because you're not playing small enough to be accepted by those still trapped in performance. You weren't built for applause. You were built for alignment. You don't need lights, stages, or slogans to prove who you are. You are the blueprint others are trying to replicate. And here's the secret few will admit. True power doesn't announce itself. It doesn't dominate or manipulate. It doesn't push people into submission. It awakens people into remembrance. And that's what your presence does. You don't push, you shift. You don't demand, you reveal. The people who try to discredit you, mock your silence, or label your calmness as arrogance, deep down, they know the truth. You don't need what they're chasing, and that unsettles them more than any crown ever could. They chase power, hoping it will make them whole. But you already are. And nothing, no title, no award, no public praise can upgrade what was divinely completed from the beginning. Your role was never to compete. It was to demonstrate what real power looks like in contrast to illusion. You weren't sent to prove authority. You were sent to carry it with such integrity that false power crumbles just by standing next to you. So stop apologizing for your gravity. Stop minimizing your light to comfort those still hiding in shadows. You weren't made to shrink. You were made to reveal what counterfeit can't survive beside. And when they try to copy your energy, remember, replication is the highest form of confession. They don't hate you because you're wrong. They hate you because deep down, they know you are the source they keep imitating. They spent their lives studying for answers, not realizing that you are the answer, while they buried themselves in books, academic degrees, and endless seminars. You walked in with truth etched into your very being. They hunt wisdom like it's a hidden code, desperately hoping knowledge will somehow translate into clarity. But you don't carry understanding because you searched harder. You carry it because you remembered what they forgot. They memorize theories, quote philosophers, cite trends, and repeat what others told them was truth. But even with all that, they remain uncertain, still tangled in noise, still waiting for the feeling of alignment. Then you speak. One sentence, one quiet observation, and suddenly what took them years to piece together begins to unravel in front of you. Not because you tried to outsmart them, but because your words come from somewhere deeper. You don't offer wisdom. You are wisdom walking. Have you ever wondered why what you say silences a room, even when you weren't trying to be profound? Why people seem shaken after conversations with you, like something inside them shifted? That's because what you carry doesn't come from status. It doesn't wear credentials. It wears clarity. The book of James says, "But the wisdom that comes from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy and good fruits." James 3:17. That kind of wisdom can't be earned through textbooks or titles. It's given. And you carry it because heaven trusted you to speak only when it matters most. They spend years perfecting how to sound wise, but you don't need to sound like anything. You speak when it's time, and when you do, there's no fluff, no ego, no agenda, just truth. Truth that humbles the room, truth that slices through intellectual pretense and lands where it hurts, in the soul. That's what makes them nervous, because you don't just bring information, you bring revelation, and revelation does what facts never can. It convicts, it awakens, it dismantles illusions. You don't enter rooms looking to correct people. But when you arrive, falsehood starts to tremble anyway. People sense that your presence alone is a recalibration. They don't come to you for noise. They come when they need the silence of real direction. You are not a source of data. You are a compass, a reference point, a living reminder of what truth feels like. That's why they remember your words even after you leave. They might not acknowledge it out loud, but your insight echoes in their minds long after the moment has passed. And it's not because your voice is louder, it's because your spirit carries weight. Have you noticed how some people seem to avoid you after you speak truth, while others draw closer as if you gave them oxygen? That's the difference between being smart and being chosen. Smartness entertains. Chosen insight awakens. And awakening always stirs discomfort before it brings peace. The prophet Daniel stood in Babylon as a foreigner, yet his wisdom far exceeded the king's magicians and scholars. Why? Because he didn't rely on Babylon's knowledge, he drew from God. The scripture says, "In every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than all." Daniel 1:20. That's what you carry. You don't just interpret facts, you unlock mysteries. People have tried to replicate your depth. They mimic your words, they mirror your phrases. But what they can't replicate is the source, because what you speak isn't rehearsed, it's remembered. You were born with a knowing most people spend lifetimes trying to develop. You didn't study it. It was coded into your spirit. And yet, even with all this, you've doubted it. You've toned yourself down. You've stayed quiet in rooms where you felt too much. But you weren't too much. You were too awake for those still clinging to shallow waters. Don't shrink your frequency just because others have never tuned into this channel before. You weren't chosen to echo the noise. You were chosen to disrupt it. Steve Jobs, the revolutionary creator behind Apple, once said, "Don't let the noise of others' opinions drown out your own inner voice." That voice you hear, that clarity others try to question, that's your calling speaking. That's your anointing operating. You aren't here to impress. You're here to recalibrate minds and spirits. And while not everyone will welcome that, no one will forget it. Because when real wisdom enters the room, it doesn't compete. It converts. It doesn't raise its voice. It raises the standard. That's you. So stop doubting how your mind works. Stop filtering your thoughts to fit shallow conversations. The people who need depth will recognize it in your silence before you even speak. You aren't just wise. You are the frequency of wisdom. Your voice resonates at the level of truth, and only those ready to wake up will hear it. They look for experts, but what they need is someone like you. Someone who doesn't need applause to speak. Someone who doesn't need a title to carry authority. Someone who simply knows. And that's why they test you, they challenge you. They try to shake you, not because they believe you're wrong, but because deep down they suspect you're right. And that truth, it scares them. Wisdom doesn't argue, it doesn't perform, it doesn't defend itself. It stands still, and the world shifts around it. And that is exactly what you do. Now that you've heard these words and something in your soul responded with a silent yes, let it settle. Let it breathe inside you. Let it rise. Because this was never just a message, it was a mirror reflecting the truth you've carried all along. You weren't just called, you were crafted, designed in secret, built in silence, shaped by the hand of God for a mission that couldn't be rushed, a wisdom that couldn't be taught, a power that couldn't be faked. You are not a coincidence. You are a construct of divine intention. Every fiber of your being was formed with precision. Your insight, your stillness, your ability to see what others miss. It's not a learned skill. It's a spiritual inheritance. While the world studied systems, you were being refined by seasons. While others memorized words, you were absorbing the weight of what can't be spoken. You don't walk with ego, you walk with evidence. The evidence of having been marked, preserved, and chosen. This world was never meant to understand you. That was never the goal. You weren't built to be understood. You were built to reveal. And when you do, when you speak, when you simply exist in your frequency, everything false begins to tremble. It's time now. Time to stop second-guessing your depth. Time to stop shrinking so others feel comfortable in your presence. Time to stop translating your spirit into a language they prefer. You were never meant to explain. You were meant to embody. Have you noticed how people watch you quietly? How they imitate your words, your energy, your thoughts, but still can't replicate your essence? That's because you're not operating from intellect. You're moving from divine remembrance. There is something ancient in you, something eternal, something that doesn't shout to be noticed. It just is. This is your confirmation. That voice you've been hearing, it's real. That heaviness you've been carrying, it's purpose. That discomfort in rooms where everyone else seems fine, that's your alignment rejecting the counterfeit. You're not broken. You're discerning. You're not too much. You're exactly what the world is terrified of, awakened. And now you must walk in it, not partially, not occasionally, fully. Because when you rise, you don't just rise for yourself. You rise for every soul who's been waiting for someone like you to remind them who they are. If this message struck something deep in your spirit, if it felt less like something you heard and more like something you remembered, then don't stay silent. Let the world know that the chosen ones are not sleeping anymore. Like this video. Subscribe if you're ready to walk boldly in your divine frequency, and drop 77 in the comments to declare, not just to others, but to yourself, I am walking in chosen alignment. And if someone you know has spent their life feeling out of place, hidden in plain sight, watching the world move but never truly being part of it, share this with them. They might just be one of us, a chosen one, unawakened, waiting for the moment that changes everything. Let this be that moment. You are not here to chase power. You are the power they pretend to possess. You are not here to beg for space. You are the space shifter. You are not the echo. You are the original sound. And now that you know this, truly know it, there's no turning back. Walk in it. Stand in it. Speak from it. And remember, you don't need permission to shine when God has already appointed you to illuminate. The time of hiding is over. The awakening has begun. And you were born ready.